I'm referring back now to the evening of Thanksgiving, and after we identified Scott in the camper, I don't recall having interaction with her after that. It was probably someone within the Seattle Police Department, whether she was still at the scene. Somebody had transported her up. I was busy with other things at the time, but I'm sure she was informed, probably by Seattle Police that evening. I can't say for sure, but she got the word somehow that evening, yes.
The Treehouse. The story Netflix couldn't tell. Part 2 of 6.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
I think folks have a perception of what a bank robbery is. I grew up in Minnesota, and Northville, Minnesota was about a 20-minute drive from my house, and that's where Jesse James robbed his last bank. And the citizens came out, and one of the guys, the bank's being robbed, grab your guns. And the shootout occurred in Northville, and they reenacted every year for Jesse James days. And I think that's kind of perception of maybe the old West, and the bank robberies and shoot 'em up kind of deal. So, I mean, that was my first exposure to bank robberies growing up, realizing Jesse James robbed this bank just down the road.
And I think I've been to that bank, actually, Shawn. I think I was teaching in that state, and I think I think they displayed the bodies or something after the robbery. I think we actually went there and did that. But I agree with you that I think people have impressions about what this is, but I've said before that what they didn't understand, especially back then, is the video and picture quality was just abhorrent. You know this, Shawn, you couldn't make anything out of it. And even later in my career, I was critical of some of the banks in town that why they didn't have secure vestibules and things like that, to where like if a guy comes in and pulls a mask, you just don't open the second door. And we had one bank in our town that had a vestibule that they could do that on. So I think it's a lot of it, back to your point, Steven, there's a lot of mythology on that, of how secure they are. So.
Strange, having lived in Europe and especially in Italy, not so much in Scandinavia, but Italy, banks are serious. I mean, you've got armed guards outside on the door going in, and you don't go in unless you go in. If you're doing it, it's all heavy gunfights. And, this was not what we were about, because you don't need that in American banks. It's all made up to be Cinderella. Happy day. Come in, get a loan for us.
The welcome sign.
Welcome sign. Yeah, just do it. It's just so ridiculous. And even when I go in now after coming out, I just look at these people that work there and I go, oh my God, And the point is that with Scott, it was, when you say you come into the vestibule and you pull a mask down, okay, then it's a bank robbery. But with him, the whole thing that came about was the prosthetics, having watched films, like Doubtfire and others that were doing it. And so he wanted me to come and help him sculpt, because that's what I was, as a sculptor, that's what I did, and we would sculpt. And it's a kind of it's a process. It's a two-week process to get these and mold and do all the things you have to do. And, I loved the idea. I said, yeah, fine, but, I'm not going into that. I'm not made out like that to go into the bank. But, and so he knew that was the actual key to going into the bank. And so when he would come in with his prosthetics, and we sculpted wigs, I would sculpt wigs from him. We'd buy real female wigs, and then I'd cut them, and we had different blonde and red and, brunette and all that. Change up a little bit. I bought all of his disguises. Depending on the weather, we disguised him differently. But he knew the prosthetic was the thing, and it all, in reality, come in. And the beautiful thing, or the very strange thing about his prosthetics, because it wasn't Hollywood perfect. I mean, you look at it and you see that, yeah, it's a human, but there's something wrong. And so when he would go into a bank, this is a very psychological thing, really. He would go into a bank and go to the teller and, tell them ma'am, you need to step back on the wall and all this. And he said when he would walk in, they would kind of look up at him and then look down and smile a little bit. And they were doing this, not looking at him, because they didn't want to embarrass him for his skin defects. like you came in with a burned face. I mean, it wasn't that bad, but a burned face. They didn't want to embarrass him, and they were so nice. And this is what he told me, of course.
Yeah.
You know, he would reflect that.
And you look at the progression of these robberies. The first one in June '94, when they wore the president's masks, right? And then, you know, sometime later, after they get involved, and all of a sudden you have the more sophisticated disguises. And that's how the FBI comes up with names for their bank robbers. We don't know them. We wish we knew them at the first time. But, you know, this is the one-armed bandit. This is the good guy, or this is Mr. Polite, or whatever. And Hollywood just seemed to be the appropriate nickname for him because of the theatrical makeup. And we had a program at the time talking about disguises. We called it Rat on a Rat. It's called Roar.
Oh, yeah.
So every Thursday paper that came out in Seattle, the entertainment section, we would publish surveillance photographs from recent robberies, and there was a reward to the identification and indictment of these individuals. And, you know, we worked pretty well, but and I had the surveillance photographs from Scott's Bank put in the paper, you know, whatever. Of course, he had the disguise on. And the funniest thing was we'd have people calling us, I know that guy. That's how you know him. He looks just like that. No, he doesn't.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It looks like that's not him.
It's funny when people talk about why the police or the FBI doesn't issue some things, like sometimes they'll hold back on an artist's sketch is for that reason, is that you can open up Pandora's box. And so if it's not great, but that'd been funny to see some of those tips. Those people were probably fully convinced they knew him, fully convinced.
Yeah.
Stephen,
How do you know this person?
Stephen, was it your all's intention to make it look botched like that?
Partly, he actually would do, because he had in the studio in the barn, we had his own little studio makeup room. And after what we did, we made components. We'd make chins, we'd make a chin, we'd make cheeks, a nose, and a little bit of a forehead. So they were like components that once he left the bank and was out of it, he could just, we had bags. He had to have a bag of mineral spirits in a bag, a little baggie, closed baggie, a cloth soaked in mineral spirits, and he would just take it like that, run like that, and another one was soap and water. So it took him 10 seconds to just take it all off and throw his wig off, and he had really thick, dark hair. So when he's coming in looking like he's looking, and suddenly you see somebody on the street with thick, dark hair and totally, you know. But no, it was a kind of an ugly, but he did his own cosmetic makeup after his prosthetics were put on. Now, with Mark at the very end, who was with us in the last robbery, I had to sculpt his prosthetics. That was a couple banks we did for him, and I had to sculpt his prosthetics. And he's he's larger than Shawn.
Big guy.
Bigger, 6'6", like 240, 50, you know, big, imposing type person. Nice as hell. I mean, he's like a big, gentle giant, you know. But this I remember because it was just so, you know, his reaction. And I put a mole, I sculpted a little mole, and I darkened that because I did his cosmetics while Scott was doing his. And, you know, you look at him and it's just, his whole purpose was just to stand there and make sure nobody left and nobody came
Crowd
in.
control.
Crowd control, calm, don't talk. You don't have to just look intimidating. Well, anyway, this guy after I put the makeup and everything, I mean, he looked like a monster, you know, baby Huey. I mean, he was human, but you just don't even want to look at the guy, inbred type looking. That mole. And I said, excuse me, but I said, man, you look like one mean motherfucker. And he goes, I don't want to scare them. I don't want to scare them. What do you mean you don't want to scare them?
You're not there to be nice with them.
You're not there. Yeah.
That's the funny part of that. It's funny when you were talking about the mole. I don't know. Have y'all ever seen the old movie, The Onion Field? Yeah.
Oh, that was great.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's a scene in there where the actor's talking. He puts a fake mole on and describes to his underling that's all they're going to pay attention to. And then he had a skip walk, but I was laughing inside because I saw that scene too. But I love that. I don't want to be there to scare anybody. It's like,
I don't want to be there to scare anybody. I looked at it.
And the funny thing with the disguises, you know, Scott hit two different C-First banks 3 times each. So by at least the third time, he's walking to the bank and probably the same teller's there, and they realize this is happening again because they knew who that was. It was Hollywood coming back for the second or third time. And are you coming back again? No, I don't think so. But it was.
He says, "I think I had enough of this bank.
Yeah, enough of this bank. I'm not coming back."
I mean, the Hawthorne gave us over $1 million, I think, after all 3 robberies.
Yeah.
Stephen, did you?
Yeah.
So he became well known to the banks.
Yeah, he was. But they, from what Scott told me, is that in general they were all very nice. And in fact, I think it was one of the Hawthorne Bank that he ran. His bag got too filled up in one of the persons that was
too
there in the
vault. Too much money
vault.
to put in the bag.
He says, "Well, I can get you another bag, sir." And he goes, "Okay, bring it, but just make sure you don't put any electronic tracers or dye packs in." "Oh, sir, we don't have those." And he checked the rim to make sure, and he looked in, but they accommodated him with another bag.
Yeah.
I mean, and he's not waving his gun. I mean, he might have gone in, he would raise his gun, then he'd holster it, and it's knowing what they know. His philosophy was this: if you go in like a crazy person, waving your gun, threatening everybody to kill him, get on the ground, all this, and if there happens to be a really formidable, tough guy or a cop or somebody that's packing that has a gun, and then they confront you, pull out a gun, what are you going to do then? You see what I'm saying? Yeah, what's your point? And then that was not our point. We tried, everything we did was to minimize confrontation on any level.
Right, because you come in escalated, it's hard to de-escalate.
You
right?
can't de-escalate.
It's too late. You can't change those dynamics. So.
And that was not our philosophy. And if it comes to a point where there's an obstacle or whatever, just abort. Forget it.
I was going to say too that Shawn, you could talk to this probably. That I have to assume that in the federal system, that the escalation would lead to more aggravators on the charges, like it would in our state laws here in Kentucky. Once you get into an aggravated assault or assault with a weapon or a wanton endangerment, that adds to that. And smart move on that part. Smart move.
Yeah, because at the time, Seattle Division, we had on average about 300 bank robberies a year, which in the state, the majority of those were in Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia areas, and then always in the top 5 in the country for field offices as far as number of robberies. But a majority of our robbers were, people that went in once or twice, no disguise, maybe sunglasses and a baseball cap. That was typical outfit. And, they were in there to get money to buy drugs for the day, and they ran out of money, ran out of drugs. They go back and get more. And they knew sooner or later they're going to get caught. And they were accepting that, but they needed the money for drugs. And, might have brought a demand note in or something like that. But very few, like Scott and Steven were, professional bank robbers. There were a few out there, but that's where the whole process of, the investigation begins. The other guys, they were easy. I mean, coming in with that, a note or not even disguised on, well, we're going to get you in a couple of days.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd have to say now with the modern advances in the facial recognition technologies and things that are coming on board and AI, that it's more of a stacked field. But I think your prosthetics would have thrown that for a loop now. I still think they would have thrown that for a loop. Yeah,
and now you have the availability of really severe prosthetics. You can buy masks that look like a human being now and, really alter your whole. But, you have gaits. You have things that you have to work. You'd have to practice the performance of a fake gait, like you've got a limp or something. You got to do stuff like that. You've got to create. And, if you have cell phones and all of that, you make sure your cell phone is being used by somebody at home away from the bank robbery, to prove that you were, if it ever came down to an investigation, that you were there at that time. And, just different. Yeah, you have to have more technical, things in place. But could it be done? It's not a matter of it could be done. In this country, it could be done, but it's a matter of having the reason to want to and the guts to make that transition. Scott had made that transition, I think, his whole life. I mean, his transition was he'd already stepped into another world of his own creation. And it was beyond, even when he was in college and so forth, he was in that other world, that treehouse. He came to the conclusion that when he was studying at Evergreen, he was renting this little cottage on the property there, little bitty old, country cottage thing. And he had all this property that he was renting, and he saw, I got to build a treehouse. And he ended up renting out the cottage to some college kids or something. But you know, at that time it was marijuana and, you know, but that was when he started building the treehouse, everything became another world, and it's formidable. I don't know how to explain it. And the treehouse was known in Olympia pretty much. I mean, he paid off the building inspectors, the building permit offices in the county. He would go down every year and give them $5,000 or however much he gave them. I mean, substantial amount, so that if they ever came out, they would demand that it was taken down. I mean, there was nothing legal. I mean, as far as somebody looks at, it was there. He lived in it. People lived in it. It was not going to fall down, but there was nothing, you know, structurally permittable. You see what I mean?
It looked like a code enforcement and OSHA violation on branches.
You had every
when you
violation.
Looked at it.
You know, it was, you know.
Do you still, Stephen, do you still have pictures or videos that you own of the treehouse or anything?
I mean, the video that was in the Netflix of them, they were in the treehouse. That was the only video. My brother made that years ago.
Gotcha.
I can still find that.
I still have photographs, a number of photographs of the whole property, but in particular, I mean, a lot of photographs of the house when we were doing the search warrant. So I still have those over the years. There's some generic. I've got a couple good photographs of the treehouse. Yeah, from one view, but it's hard to photograph because it's so big. And plus, you had walkways going into the forest, and you know, we had an outdoor bathroom with showers and, you know, everything, toilets, and, you know, it was you could live. It was beautiful. Yeah. I mean, it was magical just to go up there and spend a night or days. We would have parties and picnics and dinners up there in the summer. And I mean, I don't even know how to explain it. And because it wasn't built professionally in a sense of, you know, architecturally designed and perfect, and well, everything was just, it was amorphous, you know, it just grew. It was like a mold that just kept going and going and growing and growing. And that's what was unique about it. Not that it was carpentry, although it was amazing. Some of the stuff he did, I looked at it, but when I first came out there and I go, God, how did you do this? I mean, we would hang upside down with ropes sometimes to be able to, you know, reinforce support beams and stuff like that, you know, 45s because the wind might have shaken something. And, you know, I mean, I don't know how to explain it. I look back and I shake my head. I go, I don't even know what it was, but it was inspiring. It was life. And when you were on the compound, it was a world in its own world. And then you would step into the world. And so you could go back and forth and segregate yourself from the outside world into this mythical world. And it gave you a power that I've never experienced anywhere. I mean, you know, sometimes, you know, when you get into nature, radical nature, you know, skiers and, you know, off-trail hiking, which we did a lot of off-trail hiking together too, up in the Olympics, Everett and Rainier. And he was a formidable hiker, and learned a lot from him in that. And we would go off on, you know, 30-hour hikes in the Olympics, and actually sometimes in the you know, late summers, early falls, when the weather was just so pristine and beautiful up there in the Northwest, and we'd be up there, we'd hike maybe 15 hours, and we'd finally come to some mountaintop little lake or stream, and, you know, we sit and rest and bathe, and that's when we often strategize the next robbery. It was kind of like your minds were set free, you know, and he would come up with ideas and I would counter, and we'd do this and back and forth. And we'd sit there. We'd sit there for 2 hours under the sun before it set, before we had to descend back to, you know, back down the mountains. And, you know, it was inspiring, you know, and he said, well, what do we do this? What if we hire him or hire her, or, you know, things like that. So it was I don't know. I look at life now, to me, and it's there, but it's not there. It's just,
yeah.
I mean, do you see what I'm saying? I could never replicate. I could never jump back into what it was, but I don't think there's ever going to be anything that'll replicate what we lived. It was just too unearthly.
Now, did he own that property, those 19 acres? So
yeah. That was the point. He first rented it, and then the owner was I think he was out of Detroit. He lived in Detroit, and he contacted him and said, I'm going to have to sell this. And that's when I came from Chicago, and I helped him. He bought it, but then I had to come and refinance it. So when I came, I helped him refinance because we built onto it and we got money back from the bank to build or whatever somehow. But somehow we refinanced with this bank, and which is an interesting thing in itself, because his bank was a Seafirst bank. And I always said, you know, and that's 90% of the banks were the Seafirst banks for us back then. And I said, well, Scott, you got this thing all worked out. I said, you get a loan from the Seafirst, and then you
Get
rob
your money
Seafirst
back.
to pay Seafirst. It's like Paul robbing to pay Paul. You know what I mean? It's just, I said, you can't make this poetry up. It's too perfect. And you know, that the banks, they didn't, in the end, they didn't even want to give the reward to the family that found Scott to the boys that found Scott in the camper, hidden in the camper. Yeah. They didn't want to. They wanted to renege on the award. It was a $50,000.
$50,000 was total reward, and put up at Wells Fargo and Seafirst Bank. You know, and we had put that up midway through the investigation, and basically trying to get somebody to call and say, "Hey, I know this person," you know. And of course, that didn't happen. And you know, we're jumping ahead a bit here, but the next day on Thanksgiving, when Scott was, you know, hiding out in the camper in that backyard, just blocks away from the previous night's events. And the two sons had come over for Thanksgiving dinner, and they noticed something odd, motion or whatever inside this camper. And that's when they called SPD to show up. And so, you know, it wasn't technically to the letter as far as what the reward qualifications were, but basically that they were the ones that led us to Scott. And it was back and forth. They didn't qualify because of this or that. And I said, no. This family deserves the money, because without them, you know, who knows what the outcome would have been. But So,
who owns that property now?
No,
Who owns the 19 acres now?
I mean, you know, you people are asking a lot of questions that are going to make it sound unbelievable. Do you really want to know who owns the property now?
It's you.
Okay. Scott's girlfriend, at the time of the last robbery, they'd been together a year, 2 years, and it was Thanksgiving Eve. Okay, I need to make this story kind of organic. This last robbery was supposed to be, we had designed this actually worked on it for years, but we had designed and we had the banks picked out. We were going to do 3 banks in a row, 1, 2, 3 on the same evening. We had our vehicles purchased, everything lined up, and then we got word that the Tronet tags were put into the money. So we couldn't do it. We didn't have the ability to be able to, we didn't have the frequencies for the tracers to try to jam them. And so I said, okay, what are we going to do, you know? And so there was this bank in the one we did up in North Seattle. It was a big one, and I'd found that years before, but he didn't want to do it. It was too big at that time for his, you know, it was like kind of a very formidable bank. It was large. And so we went up and looked at that, and we knew that there was a lot of money in it. And we knew that Thanksgiving, that's when the banks, right before a holiday, they deliver a lot of money. And anyway, we changed from our 3-bank scenario into that. And his girlfriend wanted to come up for Thanksgiving. And this was a week before Thanksgiving, a week before we were having it. And I said, man, we can't have this. You can't have this. You know, we knew that there was a task force and that there was extra things going on with this. And, you know, once Hollywood shows up in the bank, all hell's going to break out, And you can't have her come up. But he kept, you know, and he was wavering. You know, this was not Scott. This was something that over time, the pressure of this world we lived in, of robbing the banks, it wears on you, you know, and you got to get out of it. You got to find the finality. And this was going to be our last robbery, by the way, too, from his point of view, too. But he was wearing, and he was weakening. He would have never had anybody come up, his girlfriend or any friend come up during a period like that, we called work periods, whether it was for a month or 2 months or 3 weeks or whatever. And she kept insisting, sending him flowers, you know. And I go, come on, man, give it a break. You can't have her come here. If something happens, she could be indicted. She could be killed. You know, I mean, we assumed they were going to kill us if they got us. And why we jumped into it, it was just another challenge. wasn't like we were ready to have a shootout or anything like that, because that's a no-win situation. It's a stupid scenario to have. But he insisted, and she came up, and I go, oh my God.
Yeah. And so then when we did the search warrant at his house in Olympia that next morning, we had cleared the house, we had cleared the barn, and we made our way back to the treehouse. And I remember looking up as a tactical situation, how are we going to enter this place? And we got ladders, you got ropes, you got walkways. And we did a call out, and just slightly after that, this woman walks out
Scott's girlfriend.
Scott's girlfriend walks out, and she's, what's going on here? And we had her come down and, talking to her during the, where is Scott Skurlock, and all these questions that were asked of her. And to my knowledge, to my impression today, that she did not know that Scott was involved in bank robberies. I mean, probably some illegal activity, maybe, but
she always thought it was marijuana
or something, drug dealing, but
something like that.
So
Nothing.
We had a lengthy conversation with her that morning, and then later on at the standoff at the camper, I had her brought up to Seattle in the hopes that if Scott was still inside the camper, she could talk him out. Of course, by that time it was too late, but so that was my interaction with her that day on Thanksgiving. It was from the treehouse all the way up to the standoff at the campus.
So to get back to your question, so there she is in the treehouse, and next morning Scott's dead. We're in prison, and she's sitting there with the massive amount of police, FBI, detectives. She doesn't know what's going on. And Scott, she should have been in Arizona where she was at. And I'm trying to, when I'm being investigated by him in the hospital, I'm trying to say, because they're going to get Scott's address, they're going to get it, the guns, they have all, and I let her know, she's don't do anything to her. It'll, she's not like that. This is serious. You can't do this to another person. And it pisses me off now to think that Scott actually did that, but he was weakened. There was something changed in him. Well, anyway, the point of view, who owns the property? She stayed at the treehouse because then Scott's parents took it over and, had it going. And then they ended up, after a year, putting it up for sale. They rented the front cottage out, and she was living in the treehouse, living in this whatever reminiscence, remembering Scott all alone in the treehouse type thing, whatever suffering she went through. And she worked as a waitress in some restaurant in Olympia. And some guy came in one day and they met and talked, and he worked for the Fish and Wildlife. He was like a head up, scientist going into the mountains and stuff, doing their research and all that. They ended up being a couple, and he ended up buying the property. It was up for sale, and he's there now
in the treehouse.
With the treehouse,
the treehouse collapsed.
That's gone.
He ended up not buying the property of the treehouse, and it was annexed another property right behind his, and he ended up only taking. Not he regrets now that he didn't buy it, but they're there now, and they live in the cottage. They live there. Isn't that
crazy?
Isn't that weird? I mean,
Shawn, who was tasked with telling her that he had passed?
I'm referring back now to the evening of Thanksgiving, and after we identified Scott in the camper, I don't recall having interaction with her after that. It was probably someone within the Seattle Police Department, whether she was still at the scene. Somebody had transported her up. I was busy with other things at the time, but I'm sure she was informed, probably by Seattle Police that evening. I can't say for sure, but she got the word somehow that evening, yes.
Well, you're going to, in the last chapter of the book, you might be more, if you just want real kind of information, emotional information and so forth, if you go from the first chapters to the last chapters and just read that. But the last chapter, people are going to wonder, okay, how did I get all this information? I was in county jail, shot up.
I thought the same thing.
You know what I mean? How did he get this information? Well, I was in contact with Scott's girlfriend, and in the book, her name is Sheila. I called her Sheila. That's not her real name, but I use her in the book as her name is Sheila. And I wrote her when I was in the federal prison in Oregon, Sheridan, and I said, can you please write as succinctly and with all of the memories and the people, the detectives, Shawn Johnson, you're experiences in Seattle and all of this. I knew this took place because we had visited. I think she came and visited me or something when I was still in Seattle County Jail. But anyway, I asked her to write this because I was at that point in the book. I've got to know what happened. I had newspaper articles of events that took place, what the police did, and the buffoonish things they ended up doing, but she wrote me about a 25-page letter, and she was writing, detective so-and-so saying this, and they were saying that, she overheard two or three police or detectives walking back from the treehouse saying, "Oh, we deserve this. We're going to get this treehouse, and this should be ours," and things like that. All of these, and she gave me dialogues of different people. And of course, I got the information, and I elaborated on what she told me. And then there was newspaper articles, and I took information from that. So it's as true as it can get, and especially from her. So it, like in the end, goes into her world. You're going to feel her. The book is like focused on her and the interaction she's having in Seattle at the Treehouse. And she had a friend that she contacted. I never knew, but she wrote in that art in the letter.
Wasn't Scott supposed to pick up at the airport that night?
Hey, there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police Podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police Podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police Podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.
Hey everybody, it's Wendy. In case you didn't know, David finally got off his butt and finished his book, True Crime and Consequences. The book is super educational and talks about the world of true crime and where it meets real investigations. It is perfect for everyone, from true crime fans like myself, to the true crime podcaster or YouTuber, to the amateur detective or web sleuth. And not to leave anyone out, you cops need to read this book too. True Crime and Consequences is available at murderpolicepodcast.com, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, well, pretty much anywhere you'd find a great book like this. So true crime fans, go get your copy today.